right, guys, ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the second edition of the college football betting panel. We got three very knowledgeable guys up with me here. We'll start off with the guy directly to my left. If you don't know who he is, you're probably in the wrong conference room. Wow. Follow him on Twitter, @JeffNadu. He is the big man on campus, has the Right Side of Campus show, also a contributor on the Roundtable. Welcome in, Jeff. How are you?
Drew, I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to this.
Crowd favorite here. To his left, Joe Lisi, an SBR contributor. Follow him on Twitter @GoForThe2, college football analyst for the Fantasy Sports Network. And he's also going to be a part of a new show, 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific, on SBR's YouTube channel, the new college football betting show. His name's Joe Lisi. Welcome in.
This is what it's all about, guys. Week 0 of college football. Doesn't get better than this. Let's kick it off tonight, baby.
All right, there you go, Joe Lisi. And last, certainly not least, Mr. Pete Loshak. Follow him on Twitter @PLoshak, host of Loshak in the Bag, 6 p.m. Eastern.
You should have said SBR legend. I mean, how long's he been at SBR?
Legend, baby. With the alligator skin sneakers. They killed an alligator, made some sneakers out of it, and now I'm wearing it. Thank you very much. All right. Excellent. Great.
Mr. Loshak, how long have you been at SBR?
10.5 years.
Wow.
Yep, 10.5 years, and a lot of stuff has happened since then. I was made eligible for Beat the Prick, won Beat the Prick, then made ineligible for Beat the Prick in all subsequent years, and a lot of stuff has happened. I'm very proudest achievement of my entire life. One year I Beat the Prick contest. That's the highlight of my life. You know what I mean?
I understand.
I mean, you can understand, right?
Yeah, Beat the Prick's a fun game.
You're like, you should be, think about, have a little positivity for the future. I don't think I'm ever going to top that.
I don't know about that.
You don't think so?
Short.
What could possibly happen that would be better than winning the Beat the Prick? I guess
Well, you met JJ Gold.
Yes, that was close. That's top 10. That's top 10, but that's not number 1 though.
Didn't you know Miss Costa Rica as well?
Yes, that was top 30.
And played Twister with her, correct?
Yeah, I watched her play Twister. Yeah, all right, that was up there, yes. But nothing beats winning a sports handicapping contest. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I once won a what's it called, a hoodie for coming in like 15th place in a contest with like 3,000 people. It's still my third most cherished personal possession. You know? Okay.
Congrats, Pete.
All right, let's talk some college football, Drew Martin.
Pete, start us off, man. Teams with a good straight-up record and might lose money against the spread.
Well, I actually have a few more teams that are bad that might be a little bit undervalued, but teams that are good that might, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's some obvious ones. Auburn is the first one that comes to mind, right?
A lot of people in the SEC West.
Yeah, a lot of people, and obviously, when you're looking for teams that are going to be good that might be undervalued coming up, overvalued, a good fade. You're looking for teams with a lot of hype. You know what I mean? They always have hype because for legitimate reasons. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking that Auburn might be one of those teams this year. Another one, the big one for me, which is the cat's out of the bag, of course, is Virginia Tech, right? Obviously, Justin Fuente. You don't want to fade teams that are coached by him, but they still have the reputation. You know what I mean? They still have some pieces that are there, but I feel like at least to start the season, they're likely to be overvalued.
Okay, so Virginia Tech and Auburn, two teams.
Those are the first two that come to mind, and then there's another that are like it's hard because every team that you're thinking about that's going to be one of those great overvalued teams is obviously has some major positives. So it's a little bit tough to try to predict which positives are going to be the ones that are going to fall short and which positives are going to be realized. Like there's a freshman quarterback for USC. If he significantly underwhelms, USC is going to be overvalued. If he plays up to his hype, which I think he might, that freshman quarterback for USC, then obviously they're going to be a great team that's not overvalued. You know, so yeah.
Well said, Pete. And Joe, what about you? Teams that will finish with a good record but lose money for their backers.
Yeah, I'm going to go with two big ones. I'm going to go with Alabama and Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I agree with Pete in terms of Auburn. One thing about Auburn, I'll just say, is that their road record since 2014. 11-13, that's a 468 winning percentage. You look at the 4 games that they lost last year, Clemson, LSU, Georgia, and UCF, all on the road or on a neutral field site. So until Gus Malzahn and the crew could prove that they can win on the road, I agree with Pete. But I look at Alabama. Alabama, to me, I mean, national champions, everybody's all in with, Nick Saban and them winning possibly his 7th national championship. But to me, I think it was a different team last year. You look at the first 8 games of the year, they averaged 298 rushing yards per game. They won those 8 games by 33 points per game. Last 6 games of the year, even though they won the national championship minus the Mercer game, they only averaged 170 rushing yards per game. They won those 4 games against FBS opponents by 10.5 points per game. You have new coordinators both on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. You lose Minkah Fitzpatrick, which is a huge loss to that secondary. And I think they struggle week 1 with Louisville. So I go with Alabama for that regard. I think they're going to struggle this year. They might win the SEC West, but I think they'll be on the outside looking in, and they're going to be overvalued in each and every game. So I think you can get some good, solid ATS action going against them this year. The other one for me is Wisconsin. This is a team last year, Wisconsin, 9-1 against Big Ten opponents. They won those 9 games by 13.7 points per game. 7-0 at home. They won those 7 games by 22 points per game. 6-1 on the road or on a neutral field site. They won those 6 games by 23.1 points per game. And when you look at their strength of schedule from an FBS perspective, their combined winning percentage of their opponents this year, 72 and 79. That's a 476 winning percentage, but they have 5 tough road games. They go on the road to Michigan, at Penn State, they go at Iowa, at Northwestern, and at Purdue. Those are 5 difficult road games within the conference against solid teams. They're going to be favored in each one of those ball games. Maybe Penn State, they'll be maybe a 2 or an even in that ball game. But again, I'm not sold on Wisconsin getting back to the Big Ten championship game and becoming a college football playoff contender.
And Joe, to go back to your Alabama comment there, Bud Elliott, the guy that was up here earlier, he mentioned that Nick Saban went ahead and hired 2 new coordinators. They're both known for their recruiting expertise, not so much their game management expertise. You think that plays a factor?
Yeah, I think a lot of people jump into the aspect of new coordinators. They think because they've been on the staff, they just come right in and hit on all cylinders.
No way.
You're seeing the game through a different set of eyes. I played at the high school level, played a couple of years in college, and I can tell you this, I played defensive back, especially when you have to read coverage. Week 1 matchup, and that goes back to Louisville, when you're forced to read formations and you now have not just one defensive coordinator, you have 2 co-defensive coordinators. You're seeing the game through 4 sets of eyes. Let's be honest, it's 4 eyes that have to come to a decision. Now, those coordinators, number 1, have to understand how that talent responds in game situations. They have to coach a game plan around that talent. And more importantly, they might be more or less aggressive than their former defensive coordinator, Jeremy Pruitt. And with that could come lack of cohesiveness and could come mistakes. So it's not just on the defensive side of the ball, but it is Mike Loxley as well, who was the former interim head coach at Maryland, that really struggled as a play caller when he took over those reins. So those are the concerns I have for Alabama entering 2018.
Okay. And big man on campus, what about teams with a good straight-up record that might lose money for their backers?
Yeah. We got the mic. I need the mic. Is it listed? We here? All right, cool. I'm looking at Miami.
Okay.
I mean, last year, they were a bad team ATS, 5-8. You look at some things that went their way or didn't go their way. Obviously, the turnover stuff was big. You have to figure that's going to even out a little bit. I got to wonder about Malik Rozier as well. He really ended the season on a poor run.
Right.
I think his last 3 games, his completion percentage was in the 40s. He wasn't good enough, just wasn't. I wonder, will they go to maybe N'Kosi Perry at some point? Defensively, they're really good, but their numbers are a bit inflated sometimes. That you kind of whole, that whole persona. I just look at them, they might have some numbers, and they weren't good last year. I think that comes over to this year as well. I don't know if their numbers are just too high and they're not going to be able to get there. Good defense, but can they score enough points? It could be a problem at times with Rozier's inability to move the ball down the field.
Okay. And what about the other side of the spectrum, BMOC? Teams with an under 500 record that could make money for their backers?
I'm looking at Cal. Cal didn't make a bowl game last year. I think they could this year. They might be at that 500 number. They're in the Pac-12, tough conferences, we know. But I like what Cal did. You look at their last 4 games. I think they lost by a combined 7 points. 3 or 4 games, lost by a combined 7 points. This was a team that was in the game. Defensively, they got much better. I think they shaved off their points per game by 14 points a game last year. Wilcox brought in a new culture, a new attitude. They have a quarterback, Ross Bowers, that can move the football. Layard at running back. Defensively, we mentioned them. I think they could be a team that's a bit undervalued. Washington State a couple years ago, Drew. I remember because I did videos with Peter Loshak. They were very good covering games
Yeah.
as a dog. I think in the Pac-12, getting points, I'm looking to take Cal a little bit more. Now, in the first game, they're laying points to UNC. UNC has all these personnel issues. They're selling their Jordan sneakers, which, by the way, I would have done as well. 13 grand you can make on those shoes, one pair on the open market, those exact sneakers.
Wow.
So I would have did the same thing. I would have sold them as well. So I don't blame those kids, but I'm not going to lay points with Cal. I just don't want to do it. I'm more looking at them as an underdog role. And they were 8-4 last year against the number.
Okay, good stuff. Joe, what about you? Teams that might overperform?
Yeah, well, I agree with Big Man on campus. I mean, the one thing about Cal as well, 2-7 against the Pac-12. They lost those 7 games by 12.7 points per game. Played Stanford very tough and lost at 10 by USC and Berkeley. I'm going to go off the radar here. This is a team dead last picked at 300-1 to win the conference. It's Virginia and Bronco Mendenhall. I mean, they're 6-7 last year. And statistically, they failed to run the football against their opponents. In their 7 losses, they couldn't rush for over 100 yards per game. But what I can tell you is, from a physicality perspective, they were understanding Bronco Mendenhall's system. And year number 2 is where you see the biggest progression in terms of coaches coaching up mediocre to average teams. Could go in the opposite effect, like a Lincoln Riley team for year 1 to year 2, where you over-exceed expectations. But I like Virginia here because I think he'll coach that talent up, especially on the offense and defensive lines. They're going to be undervalued in a lot of games this year because Benkert moved on, Quan Blanding moved on defensively. But again, they have some JUCO talent that came in. I think, that, again, they played Miami very tough. They beat Georgia Tech last year in Charlottesville. Quality triple option team. You're going to get value with Virginia all year long, and I think they'll be money makers this year.
Tough schedule, so you like them more against the spread than actually their season win total?
I like them both, actually. I think they're going to get back to a bowl this year. I think they're going to surprise some people, go 8-4 overall. I think the ACC, when you look at the division as a whole, you have Clemson, you have some teams like Louisville that I like. Miami's going to be there in terms of maybe 8 or 9 wins. I'm not high on them like a lot of other people are. But I think as a whole, they can win some ball games in that conference.
And you mentioned Benkert moving on. I believe the new quarterback's a JUCO transfer, correct?
He is.
What do you know about him?
Well, what I can tell you is that from a consistency perspective, he completes a lot of passes, can make all the throws. It's not from a passing perspective. It's going to come down from an offensive perspective, offensive line run blocking. Can they step up with Bronco Mendenhall? Because if they can run the football, they can get marginal quarterback play this year and still exceed their win total.
Okay, good stuff.
Yep.
And Pete, what about you? Teams that might overperform this year?
Well, I have some pretty ugly teams here, but they're teams that I have my eye out on. You know what I mean? These are soft predictions. The first one is I'm looking at Tulane. Right? Tulane is a team that obviously they're going to they're going to be getting not a lot of respect from the market for good reason. You know, they're at a talent disadvantage in most times, but they have Willie Fritz has a very unconventional offense, which especially later on in the year can catch teams by surprise if they're being overlooked, and also. Their big liability is on defense, and the recruiting club. Fritz is doing a great job recruiting defensive players. Now, that might not pay off until 2019, 2020, but it's still a nice plus. Sometimes that does pay off. Especially if you're that caliber of team where you only need a little bit of a boost of an improvement to have not necessarily have enough of a boost to not necessarily win games, but to cover as a big underdog. And that combined with the unconventional offense, and combined with Fritz's history of building programs, with limited talent.
Yeah.
So in general, Tulane is a team that I have my eye out for. Another one in a similar vein is South Alabama, right? A terrible team. Their season win total is, I think, is like 3.5 or 4. But and they don't recruit well, obviously, relative to the majors. But they do have very highly recruited, very highly ranked recruiting classes for the Sun Belt. Actually ranked number 3 in 2015 and number 2 in 2016. Those are the recruiting rankings. Once again. They have a lot of deficiencies, which is why they're not going to get overhyped, and which is why they might be a nice sort of a under the radar kind of team to cover in the Sun Belt. So that's another team that I'm looking. The only question there is that they do have a first-year head coach, right, Steve Camp, which is not great. When you're looking for a team to make an under the radar jump, a lot of times you're looking for like a third year in the program or something like that. So, but again, he's got the benefit of the recruiting classes that were left to him. So, and the question is just how will the market rank them? rate them. And as of right now, based on their current odds against they're against Louisiana Tech, right?
Right.
They're a double-digit home dog, almost 2, and they've gotten bet up. It's almost up to 2 touchdowns now. Their season win total is in the gutter. So I don't think that the market is going to be too quick to adjust things for South Alabama if they do prove to be a better team. And then the third one that I had my eye on was which one was it? Let me just find. Oh yeah, this is an interesting one. Very interesting team, Tulsa, right? Usually teams are relatively consistent, right? A team's like that's an elite team. You're like, well, they might not be elite, but they are. They're very consistent. Tulsa wildly inconsistent, right? And I've actually had a pretty good read. I sort of caught that early on. That Tulsa's the kind of team that just bounces back and forth. I think the reason is that they're more susceptible to injuries and to small changes in personnel talent year to year than teams that are deeper. You know what I mean? Or lower level teams that just can never recruit those kinds of guys. So Tulsa's the kind of team. If I see signs where they're likely to be worse than people are expecting, I'm usually expecting them to be a little bit worse, even than people are expecting them to be worse than what they were expecting, and the same, and vice versa. So Tulsa is coming off of, they're coming off a terrible season, right? Their win total is I think it's 4 or 4.5. I'm not sure where it is. People aren't expecting anything from them, and that conference is very jam-packed in the middle. There's a big middle class there, So if they go up against a couple of teams that are maybe a little bit underperforming their expectations, or maybe getting hit by the injury bug a little bit more than average, than expected. And they're playing Tulsa, and Tulsa doesn't deal with any injuries. Last year they had a ton of injuries. Then Tulsa might have some sustained line value until maybe the market catches up much later in the year. But in the beginning and the middle of the year, I've got my eye out for Tulsa as maybe being a team that will. Why are you laughing? You disagree? You think I'm an idiot?
No.
What is that? What are you laughing at?
No, he wants me to do this Ed Orgeron impression. he wants me to do it, and so. He says it to me, so he wants me to do it.
Just as long as he wasn't laughing at my analysis.
No,
Okay,
your analysis was
okay,
perfect.
All right, cool.
No.
Okay.
Wait, well, Coach O, he brings up USA, South Alabama, fertile recruiting ground going into your area. You bring up Miami earlier. Coach O, how are you feeling about your Week 1 matchup?
Well, I wanted to let everybody know we're happy to be here at IFBC. I saw Jim Faso up here earlier. Drew, not many people know this, but I was actually a coach in the NFL.
Really?
Yeah, 2008. I was a coach at New Orleans. We had gumbo before every game. It was great. But Drew, I'm really worried about our team this year. We're coming into the season. We had to let a couple players go, a couple quarterbacks. I'm worried about moving the football against Miami. But you know what? I do know down the road we're going to get to go to Oxford, and I get to have that chicken on a stick.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Let's hope that woman is still there. Because when I started in our career, she was there. She's getting older, but I'm looking forward to that. We'll take our team there. We're looking forward to it.
All right, good stuff, Coach O. All right, tough follow there. Hey, Joe, wanted to ask you about a Big 5 bet, I believe it is, at the South Point. And Ohio State, Bama, Washington, Oklahoma, and Clemson. Those are the 5 teams, correct? Yep. And it's you have to pay a price to be on that side, right?
Yeah. It opened up at minus 500. It's bet down. I don't know where it is today at the South Point, but in the area of, let's say, minus 285. So
but you think there's value on one side?
I like the field. Again, I like the field. When we spoke about it at the South Point, spoke about it about a month ago, the value was in the area of, I want to say, plus 330, 325 for the field of 125. You got teams in there that I'm high on. You got Georgia in that field. You have Washington, you have USC, you have Michigan, Texas. Those are all teams that I'm high on to at least win their respective divisions and get there. So again, from a value play, if you took the field at plus 335, they don't necessarily have to win the national championship. They could just get to the college football playoff, and from a hedging value, you can hedge that bet with a company called like Prop Swap, where you hedge the value. So, or you take multiple tickets. If you're going to bet like just more, let's say 1,000 or 500, buy $100 clips to where you sell 2 or 3 out if they make the college football playoff. Keep 1 for value, but I think the field was the best play with that particular bet. Like I said, we see the residual effects. Hopefully, I think it'll play out for Ohio State. I'm not sold on that team. Washington, from a FBS perspective, has a very soft schedule to get to the Pac-12 championship game, 493 winning percentage of their 2018 opponents. But they dropped that game week 1 against Auburn. They're going to be on the outside looking in. And I think the most complete team out of all 5 of those teams is the Clemson Tigers, but still, no guarantee that Clemson could in fact win the college football playoff should they get there. They lost to Alabama. They might have some quarterback situations play out in Death Valley, but we'll see.
Okay.
I think the field's the best value there.
Okay. Jimmy the Bag. Saw you just walked in. Are we good to go or? Yeah. Okay. The trivia winner we have here. You can come up and grab your winnings. $100 cash straight from Jimmy the Bag. Ski Profit.
Oh, shit.
Ski Profit. Okay, go for it.
Ski had a Lonzo Ball shirt on last night. I was very happy to see that. Shout out to him. He's a Lonzo Ball guy like me, so I like seeing that.
Okay.
Him and his girl had matching shirts on. I like that.
The question is, are you wearing big baller shoes?
No, I'm not. I didn't shout out the 500 for
All
them.
right, buddy. It's from Jimmy the Bag. All right, guys, we're action-packed with, week 1 bets, tonight's bets. Where do you guys want to start off? Week 1 tonight?
Well, I'll start off because I did give a pick on the under in the Wyoming game, and I gave it at 46, and all week it was 45, and I was just telling myself how good I am at this. Wake up this morning, come to find out it's 46.5. What happened?
Buy low opportunity.
What do you think? Did I make the wrong play? I thought I was in a great spot.
I mean, it's a total in the 40s, so
Yeah.
people just kind of, I guess, looked at it and said, you know what, that's a low total. Maybe it's 27. I think it's a 27-20 type of game, something like that.
Ooh.
But I think you got beat, unfortunately.
27-20.
That's what I think the
You,
game ends,
who
yeah.
you think Wisconsin put up 27 points?
I think Wyoming's going to win 27-20. Yeah.
You think they can put up 27? Their offense,
I do.
even with Josh Allen, they didn't have an offense.
You're right, but I like the quarterback coming in. I
Right.
think Bowles a better coach. Joe, what do you think?
All right, great.
Well, I'm contrarian on the public opinion here. I already took the over in the game. I took it at 44.5 and 45. Again,
Someone's going to win here. Someone's going to win.
here's I just think from the week 1 matchup, you have to keep in mind it's a 4 months of preparation. So it is off of last year's statistics. And granted, Wyoming, they led FBS with turnover margin, plus 24 in turnover margin. 8 came against Central Michigan in the bowl win. But both teams struggled offensively in terms of rushing the football. Both teams, New Mexico State averaged 107 rushing yards per game. Wyoming right in the area of 108. Josh Allen, with Josh Allen. Now, granted, I wasn't high on Josh Allen, but with an experienced quarterback, they only average 179 passing yards per game. They do have a freshman in Vanderwall. He's going to make mistakes, let's be honest. There's going to be interceptions made. There's going to be a lack of coverage being read by him and forced to make quick decisions. So with that could come scoring opportunity. So again, when teams have 4 months of preparation, I always go to the underdog in that matchup, especially if they lost the game the year before. And that goes to the Hawaii-Colorado State game. I like Hawaii in that matchup, not to go off topic, but that's why I like the over in Wyoming. Anything could happen. Teams are excited for a new year. Offensively, because they were challenged last year, they'll look to put in new wrinkles. And I think with that will come an added, I want to say, infusion of offensive, at least play calling. We'll see what happens and translates. Defensively, Wyoming is going to be solid. They have one guard at the safety position. They only allowed 170 passing yards per game to opposing offenses. They're going to be solid each and every week. But you look at some of the games they won last year, they won 3 games by 15 points. So they struggled as well against some of the mediocre teams on their schedule. They got blown out by Iowa and they got blown out by Oregon last year. So we'll see how it plays out. I would still lean to New Mexico State in that ballgame. They have experienced wide receiver core. Again, quarterback play, we'll see how it plays out, but he is a senior. So he's an experienced kid that's been in the system for a few years. You're going to get probably his best week
He
number
is
1.
starting, Nick Jante?
Yeah, I think he is, yeah.
Okay. And you bring up Wyoming's quarterback issues, I guess you could say, making mistakes. I mean, Josh Allen made a lot of
Yeah, he
mistakes.
did. 56.
Yeah.
56% completion percentage.
And in the last, I think I read something last year, on passes of 20 yards or more, I think it was 42%. Throwing the ball down the
that's not
field.
gonna cut it.
So, no, it isn't. And that's why, for me, when going into the NFL, I was a bit concerned about that. He's looked good so far. We'll see how that goes. But if I could just throw one thing in on week 1, I tend to, people ask all the time about win totals. I don't bet win totals. I just, it's not something I'm involved in. But if I do get involved, I'm looking towards bad football teams. One of which, East Carolina. It's a bad football team. In week 1 last year, they had James Madison University. If you know anything about JMU, real good FCS program. Top 5 this year coming in. This year, East Carolina has North Carolina A&T.
They're a good
A&T,
program.
another good program. A team that was 11-0 last year. They have a quarterback named Lamar Renard. He can move the football. Good kind of spread quarterback. This East Carolina team is really bad. And the only wrinkle they had last year that made any sense was Gardner Minshew. He was a good quarterback. He can move the football.
Yeah, he was good.
This year they have a true freshman, Reed Herring, making the starts for them. Defensively, they're an absolute mess. I'm interested to see where that number comes out at. Last year, they were 7-point favorites, ECU. I wonder if they're a favorite this year. They're a bad football team. And North Carolina A&T, good team. If I'm getting points, I'm looking towards the Aggies next.
So that's an FCS FBS matchup, week 1 next Saturday. You're liking the FCS team.
Which I like. Now, generally, I'm going to look Power 5 against an FCS, and I'm going to take the Power 5 any day of the week. For me, with land big numbers, that's something I'll do in college football and basketball, which you know. If it's a Power 5 against a Power 5, so let's say Ohio State against Oregon State, that's week 1. I'm generally not going to get involved with that, or I'm going to take the points. Okay. You're still getting Power 5 athletes. Now, we see a game, Oregon Bowling Green, Power 5 against G5. The level of athlete is so superior, Oregon to Bowling Green. So I'm going to be more inclined to lay points in those kind of games as opposed to when I have a P5 against a P5.
Well, Big Man, what about that game, Bowling Green, Oregon? Do you like the over or the under? It's 73.
I'm looking towards. I laid the points. Okay. I'm looking towards laying the points there. I think Oregon is a team, and if we kind of got into futures, if you ask me a long shot, I think Oregon could be a real good football team this year. They have a quarterback, Justin Herbert. If he stays healthy, when he was in the football games last year, 6-1, 52 points a game. With him in that rotation, they're really good offensively. We know they get athletes. Defensively, they've improved significantly with Levette at coordinator. I think Bowling Green's going to have a long day. I worry about Doge at quarterback for Bowling Green.
Yeah, I mean, his older brother was a good quarterback. He did have flashes of good stuff last year.
But the level of athlete is just so superior. And I think the most important thing in college football when hiring a coach, making the right hire. It's very simple. But you look at a team like Oregon. They bring in Cristobal. His dream job. He's a great recruiter. He's going to stay there for a long time. That's a problem they've had since Chip Kelly left. Right. They can't get a quarterback or a coach to stay there. I think he could do some good things there long term.
But to Loshak's point, a first-year head coach maybe being questionable, at least in the early season. What do you?
As far as Cristobal?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think he did some real. You and I talked about FIU when he was there years ago.
I don't know why he got fired.
He did a kick-ass job there for that year or two. Took them to a bowl game. I mean, it's hard to recruit in Florida. You know that. You're from that area. I think he's going to do good things. Might take a few games. But Herbert's really good, and he's going to score a lot of points for them. I think they get off the ledge at home, and in Alton, I think they crush Bowling Green. I think that's like a 54-13 type of game, something like that.
And guys, we got week 1 stuff coming up, and then questions. But want to get any long shots? Big Man on Campus kind of liked Oregon as a long shot future.
They're like 70-1. It's tough, but I mean, Joe mentioned a couple good ones as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just to piggyback and give statistical data. I mean, Oregon's strength of schedule for 2018 opponents, weakest in the Pac-12, 463 winning percentage. So from that aspect as well, schedule-wise, they could possibly get there. It does hinge on the quarterback.
Let me ask you something, Joe. Yeah. They've always had a defensive issue. That's always been their problem. You would agree Levitt's made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, Levitt's, you're talking about former USF head coach that turned around that program with Matt Grothe and B.J. Daniels, and then Skip Holtz decided to run it right into the ground. Not a big Skip Holtz guy, even though he's had great success at Louisiana Tech. I think defensively, they can get better because you look at the 2 games that they struggled last year, Washington State. They lost both of those games by 32.5 points per game, and I know Herbert didn't play, but that's no excuse for the defense to fall apart from a physicality perspective. So, again, I think when you look at their schedule, it's manageable. I'm not sold on Oregon being an elite team, but I think they can, get into the area 8, possibly 9 wins in that regard. And I'll just throw something about East Carolina before I give my pick. Big Man's right. I mean, total yards per game last year for East Carolina's defense, they allowed 548 total yards to opposing offenses from a defensive perspective. Close to 50 points per game. So from a physicality perspective, they're at a significant disadvantage. And you look at some of the week 1 matchups, Pitt versus Youngstown State. Pitt won that ball game by 7 points. So, I mean, and Youngstown State a couple of years ago was in the FCS championship game, and lost to James Madison. So keep that in mind as well. I don't like that game particularly, week 1, but that's another area where you can look at. In terms of teams over-exceeding expectations, I have a few. I like Iowa. I mean, Iowa's win totals at 7.5. They lost 5 games by 9.8 points per game. Nate Stanley threw the most touchdowns from an Iowa quarterback prior to 2008. They did have and record 21 total interceptions. 2 years ago, they lost Desmond King. Josh Jackson moves on. Josie Jewell moves on. But the one thing that Iowa does recruit, offensive linemen and defensive linemen, so I think they're going to be fine. It's really going to come down to, can they run the football with Torrin Young? In their 5 losses, they failed to rush for over 100 yards. But I like them. I think they can this year. And let's not forget, they beat Ohio State. Call it what it was. They beat them, put a beat down on them, 55-24.
Should have beat Penn State, too.
Yeah, let's be honest. I mean, they lost to Penn State by 2. They lost to Michigan State by 7 in East Lansing, lost to Northwestern in overtime. So that's a team I'm high on. I love Iowa this year. I picked them over Wisconsin to win that half of the division. I'll throw a team that I'll give. Are we doing overs or just overs only right now? I mean,
wherever you want to go, Joe.
I'll go 2 unders. I mean, I'm sold on Stanford. I'm sold on Nebraska. Nebraska, everybody thinks Scott Frost is going to come in and, resurrect the program. He is. He's the right coach for the job, but not this year. Nebraska had the worst rushing offense and rushing defense in over 15, possibly 20 years in Nebraska football. They rushed for 107 yards per game, gave up 214 yards per game, and more importantly, have a combined winning percentage of their 2018 opponents from an FBS perspective at 628%. And their win total's at 6.5. He doesn't have the type of personnel to run his type of scheme sideline to sideline, even though Trey Bryant comes back. So I'm sold on Nebraska this year. And when I look at another team in terms of under their win total, it's Stanford. Stanford lost 5 games for the first time since 2014. They lost 5 games on the road last year, all on the road or on a neutral field site, which is not the sign of a solid team. They lose Harrison Phillips along with their top 5 sack leaders from 2017. On top of that, you look at their 2018 schedule to start the year. They lost to San Diego State last year, 20-17. They lost to USC last year. It's both revenge spots at home. Those are their first 2 games. They get an FCS opponent, go on the road to Oregon, on the road to Notre Dame, and then face Utah without a bye week. And this is a defense last year that allowed 5 of 14 opponents to pass for over 300 yards, and they were 1-4 in those ball games.
And that was with Harrison Phillips. That
Exactly.
was with Quentin Meeks, Reed, Holder in the secondary. They don't have that Solomon Thomas or Harrison Phillips this year. I agree with Joe. That was one that I was going to try to bring up. That's a real good one. They'll move the football, but I don't think they're going to stop many people.
Are you with him, Pete? And any long shots you want to throw out?
Yeah, well, not long shots, but I'm looking at the teams that I have. Oh, sorry, excuse me, not long shots, but I'm looking at teams that I am, thinking about in terms of underperforming or overperforming. The teams that I think are in some serious trouble. I don't know if this team total is the win total is still up, but Minnesota at 5. I think that's a team in some major trouble this year, right? They don't have a quarterback. They're going to be very, very run heavy, but they're going to run up against 8-man fronts every play. They're not going to be able to move the ball at all. I'm looking at maybe unders and team total unders with Minnesota. And if 5 is still available, I think that's probably a decent play. I don't know where you get 6 wins from that card. And then also a lot of times on the peripheries where you can find good value, like bad teams where they can't make the total low enough. And UTEP season win total is 2.5. Are you seeing 3 wins? Are you seeing 1 win?
They play Rice, right?
What?
They play Rice, right?
Yeah.
That might be one win.
I mean, it's just they just don't have. They're making like incremental, improvements, which means that they'll probably lose all their games by 9 points instead of 14 points. You know what I'm saying? I'm not really seeing 3 wins from UTEP.
They have one player, Wadley,
right,
who's a running back. Real good player, but other than that, they're dreadful.
Yeah. A lot of people, people like to look at like Cal and all these teams and are they going to be better or worse, A lot of times just if you can find like a bad team that's just really bad, that's where some of the best value is. And I think UTEP,
UTEP, UConn, East Carolina, Kansas. I wonder if East Carolina can win 1 game. Seriously.
You brought up the
where are they
FCS
going to win? Who are they going to beat?
North Carolina A&T?
That's their chance, I think. Another team, UConn. What a dreadful defense they had as well last year.
Yeah.
Lose Junior Joseph, one of their best players. You lose Rhett Lashley. He went. He said, "I'm done at Stores."
Where did he go?
Where did he go, Drew?
Oh, well, he's gone.
I'm trying to think. Rhett Lashley was the former Auburn.
All I know is he's gone.
Yeah, he's not there anymore.
He's not at UConn anymore, and that's a problem. Brian Sheriffs couldn't complete a pass this year. They have a new quarterback. They're in a tough conference, too. We know the AAC. They move the football there, and
Absolutely.
they can't stop anyone. East Carolina and UConn, bad football team.
I'll give you two bad teams. One I know personally, Akron. Their win total's 4. I can tell you this right now. They are not a 4-win football team. Cato Nelson, they won their half of the division over Ohio. The reason why Akron is at 4 is because they have a very tough schedule. They lose their defensive coordinator, former NC State head coach Chuck Amato. He retired. It'll be Coach Stroud, who's the former Colorado State defensive lineman. He's been on staff. But from a skill perspective, Akron over their win total, they had the best third down offense and best third down defense in the MAC last year. Heading into the regular season, I like them plus the points over Nebraska on the road. That line opened up at 20.5. It's up to 23.5, 24. I could tell you, Coach Bowden coaches up that talent there. They get a lot of JUCO guys, former Ohio State players. They had Warren Ball that went to Ohio State. They got Randy Coe a couple of years ago from Iowa State. They recruit from the JUCO perspective and coach that talent up. So that number to me is really low. And then I'll give you an under that I like. It's Western Kentucky. I mean, Mike Sanford did a terrible job last year, taking over for Jeff Brom. That offense under Jeff Brom, Conference USA champions, balanced, rushing for over 200, passing for over 300. Sanford takes over from an offensive perspective, worst FBS rushing offense in the country, 130 out of 130, 60 yards per game. They failed to rush for over 100 yards in 10 of their 13 games. They were 4-6 in those games. And more importantly, when you look at their 6 wins that they did win, it came against FBS opponents with a combined winning percentage of 283%. So they beat up on less competition. He didn't coach that talent up. And now you lose Mike White, and defensively, I think they're going to take a step back. Their win total is like 4.5. I think you bet against them all year long.
And that's what I talk about with hirings. You lose Brom, you bring in Sanford. Sanford's a coordinator. He's not a head coach.
Horrible.
And you look at hirings. That's
exactly what it is.
That's all it's about.
I've been actually wanting to address that for a few minutes. I completely agree with you about hiring the right coaches for the right programs, and we might have a perfect example of that this year, which is Florida State, right? I mean, I think Jimbo Fisher was a terrible match for Florida State with their athletes and with all the complex offenses and everything. Taggart, sure, it's first year coach, but I'm thinking Florida State might make a huge. I mean, I'm so used to just assuming that Florida State is going to be overvalued every year, underwhelm on offense, not put up the kind of points they should put up, and now they've got Taggart coming in, who's going to do exactly what they should be doing to put up big points.
If anyone's going to knock off Clemson, which I don't think they will, it's them.
It's Florida State because the offense responds
it's
to what
in
Taggart wants
Tallahassee
to do.
too,
And
right?
you get Francois back.
Right.
The run game, Patrick and Akers are terrific.
Yeah.
Receivers are always really good. Defensively, they're very good.
Special teams is great.
Sure,
right?
and you mentioned it. That's a great hire for them.
Yeah.
It's all about every good program. You look at Georgia Southern, Drew.
Yeah.
We followed them on the Sunbelt. They were great with Fritz at the helm.
One bad hire.
Tyson Summers comes in.
2-10.
They were absolutely disgusting to watch. It was hard to watch that group. You got to make the right hiring.
Do you like them now? After this 2-10 season, they bring in they just promoted their offensive coordinator, and then.
I mean, they run that, the triple option, which is tough. I mean, sometimes when it works, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't know. They're a team. The Sun Belt's a hard conference to gauge. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's Arkansas State's conference, and everyone else is living in it.
Yes.
But we'll see. I mean, Fritz was the guy there. He leaves, and it hasn't been the same since.
What about a handicapping angle here? You guys brought up the fact of coordinators coming up, like the Western Kentucky, and it was all over the place. What about fading first-year head coaches? Joe, I know you're big into the media doing radio spots with head coaches, and they just have so much more on their plate. It's like human nature. If you move up too fast, it's just too much for you.
I mean, just to pick, and let me just say this. I interview coaches. That doesn't mean keep in mind, I don't believe anything a coach tells me because they're never going to tell you. They're never going to give you information. I don't care. Phil Steele, Lindy's, they're never going to tell the media if they're a good coach what they're going to game plan for. I've heard Trevor Lawrence is going to start for Clemson because, the coordinator said it. Well, that coordinator should be fired then, because if he's going to tip his hat to, who the starting quarterback is going to be, especially when they face Texas A&M in week number 2, you're a moron. But that's besides the point.
Do you believe Harbaugh, though? He says Shea
Well,
Patterson.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that, listen, if Shea Patterson doesn't start for Michigan, that team is going in the tank. But I'll say this about new coaches, defensive coaches. We've seen defensive coaches like Bo Pelini, like Pat Narduzzi, come over, become defensive coordinators, and then become head coaches. And sure enough, what happens? The defensive side of the ball all of a sudden starts to slip because they have new responsibilities intact. They can't just keep an eye on their baby. They have to worry about the offense. They have to worry about recruiting. It's a different animal. And I think the one MO that you want to keep an eye out on, it's a very critical year for Tom Allen in Indiana. 5-7 last year, same type of situation. They were rock solid defensively. They get Dawkins, the quarterback, over. This is a critical year because if they start to slip again, that team might be on the way to unraveling. So keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, South Alabama also has a first-year coach, but it's also a coach that I think is a very good fit. And he also inherits a lot of talent that's coming back, and also very low expectations. I know you hate the Sun Belt for good reason. Just, I'm telling you, look out for South Alabama this year against the spread. I'm not talking about wins. I'm talking about ATS results. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it seems like the smaller conferences are more volatile.
Yes.
So
definitely year to year for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Guys, what about week 1 best bets? I guess not only week 0, but next week's games as well. You want to throw out, I guess, your best bet, big man?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm waiting for the number. I'm going to wait that added game. The added games are where there can be some money. There's a reason they put them up the day of.
Right.
They're beatable. And that's one of the reasons I've loved college basketball, because I have 351 teams that I can go after. At somewhere college, it's a little lacking with the amount of teams that I can look at. But I like A&T. I'm going to take them against East Carolina. I mean that.
All right.
I like Bernard. I think they're going to be one of those teams that will beat a Division I team in the first game. And we'll continue to talk about how bad the Pirates are. Scotty Montgomery, he doesn't have a ton of talent there. You got to feel bad for the guy, but
So this could be a situation where you're just fading until further notice.
yeah.
Okay.
I think they're awful. I think they're a really bad team. And they don't have a quarterback that can move the ball like they did last year. They could at least score 20, 25 points a game. I don't think they can do that this year.
I like it, BMOC, going on record, picking the FCS team over the FBS team.
Give me the Aggies.
All right. And Joe, what about you? Best bet for week 1?
Yeah, I like Louisville, but I'll give you another one. I like West Virginia minus the 9.5, minus 10 over Tennessee. I mean, worst defense statistically against the run last year, 251 yards allowed. Tennessee, they were 0-8 in SEC play. But more importantly, this was a defense that allowed 45% conversions to opposing offenses on third down. They're going up against an elite offense in Will Grier, David Sills. Again, if they jump up early, the one concern I have about that ball game is no matter who starts, Garantano or Keller Christ, they don't have the type of personnel to get into a shootout with West Virginia. And this was an offense last year that only averaged 30% on third down conversions. So if they struggle early and Will Grier is hot as a pistol, that's a concern I have. I know it's a new head coach, but again, I don't think Butch Jones coached up that talent. They're at a significant disadvantage in the secondary. I like West Virginia as well. I like Akron as a dog. I agree with these guys on Tulane. Keep an eye. That Tulane line is pretty fishy because that line opened up at 8. Kendall Hinton, the quarterback, and 2 other players for Wake Forest are suspended. And that line didn't budge in terms of Wake Forest. I mean, from 8 to 7. I mean, Kendall Hinton is a dual threat quarterback, and the fact that he's not playing in this game should be a huge loss to that Wake Forest offense. I mean, that line, I think, is staying up there for a reason, but I like Tulane in that matchup.
Well, Joe, we talk about Willie Fritz and bringing in that option offense. Do you think the extra time to prepare for it is really helping that line stay above 7?
Well, yeah, I mean, it can, but I'll always say this about the triple option. It's a lot different in practice speed than game situations. When you see that triple option in terms of zone blocking up front, it is a different animal. And the one thing that Dave Clawson's done, physicality on the offense and defensive lines, when he got there, they were one of the most sacked teams in FBS. Last year, he cut it down to right around 20 sacks per game. Physicality's there, but still, the triple option's a different animal.
And before we get to you, Pete, big man on campus, did you have anything else before we shut this down on the FCS games? And also, you had liked another team under.
Well, I mentioned Army. I talked about that in the roundtable. There was a question mark, even up till recently, would Ahmad Bradshaw get another year of eligibility? He isn't getting another year of eligibility.
He's out.
So I think they're going to struggle at the quarterback position to move that option. And they're a team, if you read some of the quotes coming out of from Monken, they don't sound too good. It doesn't sound like they're prepared to start the season out. Their win total's high. It's like, I think
like
7.5.
right?
That's too high for Army.
And don't you normally like the military academy?
I love them. Yeah, military is the best. I love Miyamoto Lolo at Navy. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. A true essence of a coach is him.
I thought Oregon State should have hired him. Bring in the triple option to the
Why
Pac-12.
leave Navy? Why leave the Naval Academy? I mean,
Isn't
you
it
have everything
harder
you need
to
there.
recruit there?
I think it is sometimes, sure. But you have those kids that are dedicated. They have the discipline. You know, they run that great program there. They go out and win. I mean, I don't think there'd be a better place to coach as far as long term. He's done a great job there, but Army will struggle without Bradshaw at the helm. And with short time to prepare, I think they're going to have some
I like
questions.
that one as well, under on the Army. And before we get to questions, Pete, anything you want to throw out week one best
Yeah,
bet?
I mean, I did take Tulane, of course. For all my analysis, I got him +7. The one thing that makes me nervous is I love Clausen as a coach. I don't like to bet against him, right? We've seen what he's done with Wake Forest. And, yeah, so betting against a coach like Clausen with all that time to prepare is something that makes me extremely nervous. Okay. But I did take him at +7. And I also, again, I think that Florida State, maybe not necessarily on the spread, maybe just on the team total over, which should be about 32. There's some serious issues with Virginia Tech's defense this year. It's not what it was in years past. And again, how will Florida State respond to Taggart's schemes offensively? They might be explosive, you know? So I'd be leaning Florida State -7, leaning to the over on that one, and I think combining them, the Florida State team total over, which as of right now would be, 32, a little bit up there. But again, with the schemes that he runs and the athletes that they have and the defense that Virginia Tech's probably going to be bringing, I would be willing to bet that over 32 in the Florida State game. Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm looking at the live SBR odds feed right now. If you're liking Florida State, you better hurry because 7.5s are starting to show up. But I guess, Sophie, if we're ready, we can move to questions. Any questions, guys? Okay.
Hey, big man, you said you liked that A&T game against East Carolina. What do you think that number comes out at?
That's a good question. Drew and I were talking about that when we were eating. They opened I think there were 7-point favorites last year against JMU. What do you think, Joe? They have to be a favorite. They're not going to be an underdog to
East Carolina, maybe like 6.5, 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's going to be a low number. I don't think it's going to be double digits.
As long as I'm not laying points with A&T, I would take it. I would say probably same as it was last year, 6.5, 7, like what Joe said. That's where I would probably put it.
I mean, Minster was at Washington State, so.
Right. And that's a good transfer for Mike Leach. They had a terrible offseason, the suicide, which was sad. And, they bring in a quarterback that can move the ball. Helinski would have been great, but Minshew can move that offense as well. But I would say 6, 7, like what Joe said. That's probably where I was thinking.
6.5 can be really telling because that means they don't want you to have the full touchdown.
Good
so that
point.
could be pointing toward it as well. Another one up here. We got the microphone for you.
Well, this is a football conference, Randy, but
Okay.
whatever you want.
Well, you're in that Philadelphia area,
Yeah.
so I just want to know what do you think of UConn? Are they going to reload this year? Are they going to be something to kind of fade them, or?
You said UConn?
Yeah.
Now, Randy, that's
I mean,
not
Villanova, excuse me.
Oh, Villanova. Yeah, listen, I was actually talking to Ed Fang last night. We were talking about some of the futures, and I think 8-1 is a laughable price. I know they won last year. I was at the Final Four. I saw it. It was great. But you lose your top 4 players. I mean, that production is hard. And Jay doesn't bring in those top 5 recruits. He has one this year, Javon Queerly. They bring him in. But other than that, they had to replace a lot of talent. He's not one of those guys like Duke, like with Mike Kay, he's going to bring in, or Kentucky. They're not going to have those recruits coming in right away. They're not going to be a bad team. They'll be in the tournament and do fine. But to win the whole thing, get to the Final Four, I don't think there's any way. Too much to replace.
Rocky Minichetti. Each of you, could you pick the national championship winner prediction?
I'll say Clemson. I think Clemson's going to be my pick. One thing about Clemson, I mean, that from a statistical advantage is that Dabo Swinney and the team win on the road. Last 3 years, 20-3 on the road or on a neutral field site. That's an 869 winning percentage. You look at the teams that they faced on the road last year, Louisville, Virginia Tech, NC State, South Carolina, Miami. They won those 5 games by 21.2 points per game. They only gave up 160 passing yards per game. They only gave up 114 rushing yards per game and held opposing offenses to 26% on third down conversions. That's a huge, huge gauge when you're looking at some of the better teams. What's the gauge for third down defense? Any team that can hold opposing offenses 34, 35% and under has a chance to be a winning football team because you're forcing 3 and outs. This is a team in Clemson that held 7 of 14 opponents under 50% completion percentage. They were 7-0 in those games and won those games by 26.6 points per game. Brett Venables, Dabo Swinney have done a fantastic job, eerily similar to Nick Saban in Alabama. And when you look at those top 5 teams in that bet, Clemson's the clear-cut favorite in my opinion.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, excuse me. As far as actually winning, I'd have to agree with that. There's some teams that I think might be a little bit undervalued in terms of their current futures odds or previous futures odds. That might be like Washington, Michigan. I think Michigan might have a really big year this year, bigger than even people are expecting, which is a little bit strange to say. But I'm not going to pick them. Maybe I'll pick them as a team with value. But as far as which one's going to win, I am a teeny bit down on Alabama. You know, I think a lot of people are, and I would have to say Clemson. Can't take Wisconsin. Can't take Ohio State. Washington and Michigan would be my picks for value, but I would have to agree that Clemson would be my actual pick.
Yeah, look, if you know me, you know my NFL guy is Jimmy Garoppolo. I have a man crush on Jimmy G. In the college ranks, it's Shea Patterson. I've been talking to this guy, but I think he's going to be the best quarterback to ever play at that university. I think Clemson will beat Michigan in the national title. I agree with these guys. I don't see a flaw with the Tigers. I think defensively they have possibly the best defensive line we've ever seen at the college level.
But Michigan, I feel like I don't know how high I want to be on them, but every bit of research I do on them makes me like them more.
The only thing that holds me back is their offensive line. Right. I think they have some question marks there. But if they can get some of that, they have John Runyon's son there. If they can get guys like that to step in and create a role, I think they're really good top to bottom.
I picked them top 4. I picked them top. Yeah. I mean, the one caveat about Michigan is winning percentage of their 2018 opponents is very, very difficult. 631% from an FBS perspective. That's highest in the Big Ten. But it's not just the offense. And to piggyback, because I love Shea Patterson as well. In Michigan's 5 losses last year, they only completed 48% of their passes, 1 touchdown, 6 interceptions. So from an offensive perspective, they were a one-dimensional team and only averaged 87 rushing yards per game in those losses. So that's why Shea Patterson's a huge difference maker to that offense.
And I think the defense might be even better this year.
Yeah, 150 passing yards allowed.
You have to agree it might be top 5. It was top 3 last year,
Chase
I believe.
Winovich, Rashawn Gary, Devin Bush, long in the secondary. I mean, they are going to be...
Rashawn Gary.
Yeah.
Forgot him, Drew.
Bergen County.
Let me ask you guys this. You guys like Shea Patterson a lot, but didn't the backup, at least statistically, do just as well as him at Ole Miss?
But here's the thing. I mean, when I look at a quarterback, everybody thinks it's cookie cutter. Well, at Ole Miss, he struggled in third down conversions. Ole Miss's offensive line was horrible. They had a lack of a rushing attack that only averaged 133 rushing yards per game, and they were a 5-wide type of offense. They're going to be more pros this year, and that's the difference.
And what kind of leader did he have?
Yeah.
Hugh Freeze? I mean, come on.
And then Matt Luke, an interim head coach.
He finally has a coach, and this goes to Harbaugh.
What's wrong with Hugh Freeze?
Did you see what happened off the field, Drew?
Okay,
I mean,
yeah.
He wasn't focused, that's why. And he wasn't a leader, at least in this last year Shea had there. They weren't bowl eligible either last year. They didn't have a lot to really look out for. But Harbaugh, on the other hand, has to perform. If he doesn't win, I think you seriously got to look at Jim Harbaugh long term. I mean, how much more talent do you need on a team? This is the year. Either this year or next year. If he doesn't win, I think you got to look at getting rid of him. You got to move on. It's not working.
Yeah.
And I guess to answer your question, I would go with Clemson as well. Bud Elliott earlier brought up a point as far as, because I would get down to Alabama or Clemson, and the Alabama coordinators, more recruiters, not so much game planners. That would point me towards Clemson. Plus, I'd rather pick an ACC team than an SEC team. Easier road. Any more questions out there?
I could do this all day. I could do this all day.
Listen, I've got quite a few questions because I'm actually reading the ones from the live chat, and they're coming in hard and heavy for you guys. But first of all, fantastic show so far. Question from Nolly Knows, a question for Loshak. What weather conditions would you consider to affect totals the most? I look for wind 25 miles per hour or more.
Yeah, and also it very much depends on how that combines with the expected game plans. You know, a team that's very predicated on the pass is obviously going to be a lot more affected by high win totals than teams that aren't predicated. That's why triple option. With a triple option, it doesn't matter nearly as much. But yeah, and also and there's also some in some stadiums it matters more than others. But yeah, anything over 15 miles an hour is something that I'm seriously considering.
And getting out ahead of hurricanes and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, you remember
Yeah.
a couple years ago, I'm fascinated by weather. I think it's really interesting. If you can get out in front of that stuff and get some of those totals before they move, they're moving 10, 12 points.
But and it depends on the location. There's a lot of times
Right.
you'll see wind reports of 15, 20 miles an hour in Texas stadiums. You know what I mean? And a lot of times I take that a little bit with a grain of salt. Actually, similar with baseball. You know, if I see like a strong wind blowing in Ranger Stadium, I don't take that nearly as.
It can be
another-
wrong a lot in
What'd you
baseball.
say? Yeah, they can be wrong too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
also
right.
dispel the myth that cold weather affects quarterbacks. Does it really? I mean, come on.
It does
I mean,
to a
that's
degree.
the oldest debate. Go ahead.
I think it
The
depends
ball-
where the
it's actually
quarterback's
the
from.
ball- It's not even the court. It's the ball becomes much harder.
Right.
But I'll say this to just sentiment what you guys said about wind total, wind. All right. Yeah. Try and find for an advantage. There's live feeds of stadiums sometimes.
Yeah.
So if you can get a live feed, I used to work for ABC Sports as a college football researcher. Biggest thing was probably 2-3 hours before the game, you used to be able to see the live feed of the game. You know if it's going to be wet weather, if it's going to be an issue, and all that. So if you can pick up little intricacies along the way while you're making your bets, that's always a huge
And
advantage.
finding those, beat people
Yeah.
that hey, weather's bad. And now with all these shows they put on before the game,
Yeah.
hey, we're live
Right.
in Kalamazoo.
Right.
Having said that, though, weather, because of the factor that everyone knows is very easy to find out the information on, tends to be a little bit, at times, I'm not saying it can be an overvalued factor, for sure,
And you could take it the other way and get great value if the line drops so much.
Right.
All right, thank you. Another question here. Brian Seymour says, Natalie, ask thoughts on Big Ten as a whole.
Like who's going to win?
Big Ten as a whole.
Big Ten as a whole. Just repeating the question from Brian Seymour on our live chat.
Who's in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I didn't hear the question fully.
Ask thoughts on Big Ten as a whole.
Good conference. Like them.
I think from top
All right.
to
Solid conference.
from top to bottom, it's probably one of the most competitive conferences when you look at it. Probably even up there with the SEC this year. I think you have teams like Iowa, you have teams like Northwestern, Purdue, and Jeff Brom that are more competitive. Went to a bowl game. Michigan will be there. Michigan State 10-3 last year, has a ton of returning starters. Brian Lewerke comes back. From a quarterback perspective, this can possibly be the most complete conference when you look at guys like Alex Hornibrook, Nate Stanley, Clayton Thorson, Lewerke, Shea Patterson. You're going to have Haskins there, Trace McSorley. So from top to bottom as a conference, not only the most competitive, but possibly the best conference when it turns to quarterback play and with senior leadership as well.
Yeah, my thoughts are, I'll just say, as of right now, again, I'm high on Michigan. Every minute I research them, I like them more and more, and I'm wondering if I'm seeing something I'm not seeing. And what do you guys think of Penn State? I mean, Saquon, all the losses, but
I think they lost too much.
You think so? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Here's the thing about Penn State that, when you look at value, under James Franklin in the last 2 years, Penn State's 14-0 and has won those 14 games by 24.6 points per game. Both losses last year to Ohio State and Michigan State came on the road. They have a tough game. It's an in-state rivalry against Pitt. It's a low number. It's 14 points. They failed to cover that number last year, around 19.5, 18.5 in that area. It's a huge, huge matchup for recruiting. Narduzzi's on the hot seat, in my opinion. They need to step up in that game. They have a solid quarterback in Pickett. But that's going to be a huge loss. Let's look at it. I mean, Joe Moorhead's no longer there, and from an offensive perspective, they lose 161 receptions with Barkley, Hamilton, and Gesicki. That's a huge, huge loss. Forget about Miles Sanders' rushing ability. It was Saquon Barkley's ability in the short to intermediate passing game. He had over 600 receiving yards that offense is going to miss in 2018.
I think that's the biggest question in the conference, right? Are people overreacting? Because I've read strong opinions on the other side, saying that all the people who are saying that Penn State lost too much are way overreacting to the losses and not looking at who's there.
It was on both sides of the ball, too. You lost Jace Gambinda, one of your biggest captains on the defensive side. I live in that area, so I hear all the ridiculous Penn State people that are just so delusional that's not even funny. But I don't want to get into that. I know we got to wrap it up. But I don't like Penn State. I think they lost way too much to, I mean, like Joe said, I mean, those are good footballers. These are NFL caliber players. I don't think, McSorley's not going to have that luxury this year.
All right, guys, great stuff. We're a little bit over on time. Big man on campus, Joe Lisi, Pete Loshak, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hello. Hope all of you are having a great Saturday. My name is Clay Travis. I host the morning national Fox Sports radio show from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern nationwide and run a website called Outkick the Coverage. Next to me, I've got a guy that a lot of you will probably recognize, good buddy of mine, Jason Whitlock, at Whitlock Jason on Twitter. Hosts a very popular show, Speak for Yourself, SFY, on FS1 every afternoon. He and Colin Cowherd have been doing it for a while, and I think some changes are coming to that expansion. Things have been going very well, and both of us are a lot like you guys and girls out there in that we love sports, but we also love sports gambling. And if you remember last year when we did this event, I'm sure some of you were down in Costa Rica. It's an awesome event put on by Zach Jones and a lot of the SBR crew here. I mean, just did an incredible job that first year. Johnny Manziel, I know you guys have had an incredible collection of speakers here as well. But to me, a big topic that we had last year was the Supreme Court has agreed to take the New Jersey challenge of the sports gambling law, PASPA, which had restricted the legality of other states from deciding to allow sports gambling. And in May, that ruling came down. I actually went up and watched the argument in the Supreme Court in December. But last summer, we had a debate about whether or not we thought that Supreme Court was going to overturn PASPA. And my argument was that they were. I ended up being right. And it's amazing how quickly things have already started to evolve. I was talking to a buddy of mine who lives in New Jersey, and he said he thinks it's crazy. He's got an app on his phone, and he can bet anywhere in the state of New Jersey. And it's starting to happen all sorts of places. Mississippi, down in the South, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. It's just a matter of when, not if now, many states are going to have sports gambling legalized. And a big part of the impact of sports gambling will obviously be in the media and the way guys like me and Jason Whitlock talk about sports gambling and maybe talk about it more. So I'm going to start with introducing here again Jason, and thank you guys for having us here. Thanks to SBR for putting on this event. But Jason, you like to pay attention to the line. You've been known to lay a wager occasionally. I met up with you at the craps tables at the MGM here to come over here today. How much, if any, do you think the way that you cover sports will change now that sports gambling is officially legal, probably in many states nationwide?
Well, first thing I want to say is I've been a Sportsbook review user for more than a decade. It's how I discovered Five Dimes and some other safe betting places. So I'm really honored and glad you guys invited me. But in terms of, for me personally, I'm not sure if it's going to have a great impact on me. I do think it's going to have a great impact on the sports media because I think that, and look, guys, I'm if you know anything about my work, I'm not politically correct, and so I'm going to have a very politically incorrect conversation here. But I think so much of the media, sports media, has gone away from catering to the hardcore sports fan. And I think that this gambling thing now is going to force the media back to actually catering coverage to hardcore sports fans. I think most gamblers love sports. I think, obviously we like having money on the game and we like that feeling and we certainly love winning. But I also think we love sports. That's where our sports gambling passion came from. And I just think if you look at the sports media world led by ESPN over the last decade and a half or so, they started catering everything to the casual sports fan. And that's why we've had so many people come into the media space and they almost have no interest in talking about the game because that's not their interest, that's not their passion, and they want to talk about the politics and the gossip and everything else surrounding the game. And so I'm really hopeful that by the legalization and sports gambling becoming more part of the mainstream and less shame around it, not that there hasn't been much shame in recent years, but less shame around it, just more of a conversation, that we're going to get back to actually catering the coverage and the conversation around sports is going to be catered towards the hardcore sports fan. I think that a lot of things we've seen out of ESPN from talking about President Trump constantly. I'm a non-political person. I don't give a fuck about President Trump when I'm watching ESPN or my network, FS1. I want to talk about sports, and I think most sports fans do. And so I'm hoping that's the influence we end up getting from sports gambling being more part of the culture and more mainstream.
I love that take. I also think that when sports gambling becomes more mainstream, and I think it certainly has, and I think if you guys are out there right now, there are lots of meetings going on at NBC, at Fox, at CBS, at ESPN, at Turner, all of these different major media partnerships that are in cahoots with the leagues about how do you talk about gambling now that sports gambling is going to become so legal in so many different places. So let's a broad question again for Jason Whitlock here, and I'll answer it at the end of his. Is sports gambling sweeping across the nation and becoming legal for more and more people good? I think your answer is yes. Is it good for sports overall?
So you got to just know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
I think there is an argument to say, look, gambling's bad. And gambling crushes a lot of people. But you're talking to me, Jason Whitlock, my mother, when I was a young child, because my family was into gambling. She taught me a lot of the elements of gambling. Her father was the big numbers runner in the black community in Indianapolis. My dad, all of his friends, gamblers. And so consider the source. I think this is going to be great. Again, because one, I've never been ashamed of gambling. My family, we've been involved with gambling. Again, no one, my mother, dad, I can't say, well, my father had a gambling problem. I got to say that. I mean, he loved to gamble. But when I say we didn't miss any meals because of it. He never. But for me and for the Whitlock family, we're really looking forward to this. We think it's going to be great. We've been able to pay our bills for several centuries, and I think we'll survive this gambling wave. Look, is there the other side that maybe some people will get hurt, but no risk, no reward. You can get hurt crossing the street. So
we almost did getting in here tonight. They got the main entrance shut down here at the Golden Nugget. And again, thanks to Sportsbook Review, you can see the logo behind. I'm Clay Travis, Jason Whitlock sitting beside me. I think it's a tremendous benefit for sports in general because there are a lot of studies out there, and I think you hit on it early. Sports gamblers are the hardest core of sports fans. And so if you got a line on an over-under, I know we've texted back and forth about a lot of games that we're on the same side of. If you've got something on the line, it could be a game that's 28-point line. What they have found is that the ratings actually increase when the numbers are in play. And so it's always been really interesting to me how the mainstream media has tried to finesse that line, whether it's Brent Musburger kind of giving you a little bit of a clue about what might be going on, his friends in the desert. But the number of rating points actually increase in the fourth quarter if the game is still in doubt, the over-under and the spread. And so I think this is going to be massive. To me, I think there are going to be a lot of changes in terms of how it's covered. I mentioned earlier CBS, NBC, Fox, ESPN, Turner, all these different companies exploring different ways. If they came to you and they said, Jason Whitlock, you are now the grand poobah in charge of trying to integrate sports talk into sports media, what's the best way to do it?
I'll tell you one of the first things I would do is I would, just like how we have Mike Pereira that comes on during the game and talks about refereeing. We know as gamblers, when you have money on the game, you watch the game completely different. And it's a completely different conversation. And so back in the day, remember Jimmy the Greek Snyder back in the day? I would now have a guy like that able to come into the booth, and when crazy things happen that impact the line, and you know that there's a large, significant percentage of your audience that some play that may be irrelevant to the person that had no money on the game is highly relevant to you, I want that Jimmy the Greek Snyder or Clay Travis or someone to come on and say, oh, my God, did you see what just happened? This idiot right before halftime, they didn't go for it, and the over-under on the first half line or whatever. And I mean, because there's just, the small details. The guy didn't get out of bounds, and they have to settle for a field goal rather than scoring a touchdown. All those things that never get discussed that we sit in a sports book or sit at home and talk about, you need a little of that on the broadcast.
I agree. I mean, I think there's an element of Gamblecast kind of that you're talking about where you could integrate it completely and be able to go after it in a unique way. I always like to ask people these questions because I'm sure everybody out there listening to us right now at this second annual IFBC event, Sportsbook Review, doing an incredible job putting this on, have got great wins and great beats. The good wins and the bad beats. When I ask you right now for the worst beat you can remember in your head that comes to your mind, is there a game where you think this one crushed me? It zapped my soul. Like I was on the right side.
Last year, you guys know I played. Or no, you don't know, but I played college football at Ball State, and I follow the Ball State program intimately, and so those lower level mid-major games where sometimes you can get an advantage over the odds makers. I understand Ball State football almost as well as anything in the world. And last year, it was the Akron quarterback was the Buffalo. Buffalo University and Ball State. They have some 6'6" quarterback at Buffalo that's really talented, and I just knew we were going to get lit up at Ball State. I love Ball State, but I love money more, and so I'll bet against Ball State. And that game last year, and Clay knows exactly what I was talking about because I talked him into betting on it too. I had a shit ton on it, and they did the Buffalo coach did some of the dumbest stuff in the world right before halftime. He got a personal foul penalty that stopped his team from scoring right before halftime. And sure enough, not getting that touchdown right before halftime bit me in the rear end at the end of that game. And I had a ton on that game, and I had the game right, and the coach just blew it for me. And I mean, those types of things are just fun to talk. They're terrible to experience, but they're fun to talk about a year later, or now the new football season. I just now recovered from that, by the way. But
I'll tell you mine last year. There were two games that still make me a little bit sick. I had a ton on the Vanderbilt. These are bad beats, right? Because I think everybody out there right now has them where you feel like you're on the right side, and they stick with you a lot longer than maybe the big wins that you didn't deserve. There were two games that stuck out to me last year. I had a ton on Vanderbilt at Florida. And the final, some of you may have been gambling on this game. You may remember it. Florida had a 4th and 2, and they went for it. And they took a timeout. And right beforehand, Jim McElwain said, whatever you do, don't score. If you get the first down, just take a knee and let that clock run out. We don't have to run another play, right? I'll be damned. They're like 40 yards away. Guy gets through, breaks a tackle at the line of scrimmage. Vanderbilt's basically in a goal line defense, and I'm standing up screaming, go down, go down, go down. Guy scores. There's nobody there, and that was the cover, right? And Vanderbilt had been inside the number for the whole game. They've been playing exactly like I anticipated. I think that also hit the over. So I had Vanderbilt and the over hit on a play where Jim McElwain is on the sideline screaming, go down, go down. I think he's a freshman running back. He's like, I'll be damned if I'm going to go down. I'm going to get the glory here. Scores the touchdown. The other one, last year's national title game, I'm sure a lot of you were watching, Georgia, Alabama. I had the under. The under was the right side by far, right? It's 10-0 at the half. Alabama is so bad that they have to pull out Jalen Hurts and put in Tua Tagovailoa. He gets everything rolling for the Alabama offense. Into the game, despite all of that, Bama on the final play of the game has like a 37-yard field goal to win it, right? I had Georgia plus 6.5, I think, and then I also had, again, the under, and I had the under big. And I was on the field because I was covering that game. So I'm on the sideline, and I'm thinking to myself, they let you go down for like the last 5 minutes. I'm thinking to myself, God, please. I'm saying a silent prayer on the sideline. 37-yard field goal right in the center, final play of the game, perfect angle. Kicker comes up, college kicker, just yanks it. It's one of the worst misses you can possibly imagine. Game goes into overtime. Georgia bombs through like a 53-yard field goal in the first overtime, and then Alabama, got sacked back, and you thought to yourself, okay, maybe they won't score a touchdown. Tua Tagovailoa makes an incredible throw for a touchdown. Bama wins by 3, doesn't cover, but that over-under was brutal. And I got a funny little anecdote about that. There are a couple of managers on the Alabama football team, right? Guys who carried the football on the sideline. They come sprinting over, start at overtime, and they just happen to kneel down right in front of me. I'm right along the 25-yard line.
Was this during the national anthem? No.
Yeah, well played. And they kneel down right in front of me. I don't know who they are. They turn around. First thing they say to me, I swear to God, sorry about the under, Clay. So even the managers on the Alabama football team, it's kind of interesting. I think the younger you are, the crazier the crew thinks that you shouldn't be able to just bet on your phone or at least be cognizant of it. The guys that I talk to who are in their 20s, their 30s, even their upper teens when they're in college, they're the most aggressive gamblers out there. Maybe not big money, but they've just gotten so used to the idea that they should be able to do everything from their phone that's what they want to talk to me about. Want to talk to me about their good beats.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You've just taken me to a great question. Do you think the pervasiveness of gambling, because when I was a college football player, it blows my mind. And again, I come from a gambling family, but it wasn't sports gambling in my family. It was a different kind. But I knew nothing about the line when I was a player. Virtually as soon as my fifth year of college, when my career was done, I immediately started paying attention to the line. And so I'm wondering, with this pervasiveness, and you talk about managers and everything, are you worried about corruption coming into the game with the pervasiveness of gambling?
I think that could be one argument about how popular it's going to become, that guys are going to know in a way that they didn't. And also, I would say they're going to hear about it on social media. You know how players complain now when guys say about fantasy, like, hey, why didn't you get me those points? You cost me a championship or whatever you did. I do think that the legalization actually in many ways makes that less likely, because if there's big money coming in, it gets flagged, and you could actually theoretically be able to catch somebody.
But Clay, isn't it factual that in European soccer and soccer over in other countries, it's gambling's legal and the soccer is very corrupt?
Sometimes. And I mean, I think that's just a function of human nature. What I have found is, in reading and studying this issue, that most of the time the way they get caught is by the gambling people, right? In other words, they're not getting caught by the FBI doing a sting out of nowhere. It's that there's been abnormal betting patterns going on, and they're able to eventually track that down and say something's going on here. I think it's certainly something you have to watch. I think college would be more susceptible to it, because if I'm in the NBA or I'm a Major League Baseball player or I am an NHL guy making millions of dollars, you typically can't get down enough money to be able to make it worth your while to be involved in that if you're a pro athlete. If you're a college athlete, a couple of grand makes a big difference.
If you're an NFL player in a locker room with a guy that's making $30 million and you're one of the guys making $700,000, I've seen this as a journalist. This doesn't relate. What I've seen doesn't relate to to gambling, but what I saw were guys that were in the NFL, not making the big money, but trying to live the same lifestyle as the guys that are making the big money because they're in the NFL. And the thing that would concern me is, what's an easy way to increase your cash flow without the government being involved? And it would be by, if I'm making $700,000 a year and I can make an extra $50, $100, $200,000 for not making a tackle or not scoring a touchdown or something like that, that would be my fear.
I definitely thought that when the Florida player scored. On the after his coach had told him to take a knee, I definitely thought he's trying to make everybody happy. I think the other thing is, I think coaches pay attention to the line, because I think you'll be amazed how often late in a game a team will punch a score across. I think they think this makes the alums happy, right? Because most people who gamble, they got a favorite team. They're not going to be that neutral. They're going to bet on their favorite team to cover. It's great to win. Good teams win. Great teams cover is the cliche. And I think they know that it's better for their long-term happiness of their fan base if they cover. And so I think coaches are certainly aware of it.
And so I'm wondering, this will be an issue for you and I in the media talking about sports, is as a gambler, raise your hand if during the football season you end the year saying, I know I watched 2 or 3 games that I felt were fixed.
Yeah. There are almost, for people who are watching on video, almost a huge percentage of the hands in the room here went up.
And so are we going to now be able to talk about that? I could see, restrictions being put on that, and I'm not sure it's something I would want to talk about, but I certainly feel as a gambler, I've seen some flags and some things that just don't make sense. And as gamblers, we sit up and talk about, but we don't talk about in the media. We talk about bad beats and we'll point it out, but we never go that extra mile and say, man, I wonder what this dude was doing, what he was really doing here.
We talked about the leagues and the impact that could have, and I want to dive into that. I'm going to make you commissioner, much to the chagrin and terror of a lot of people out there. You were the commissioner of one of the 4 major pro sports leagues, maybe golf also, and NASCAR. What would your perspective be on legalized sports gambling now that it's happening? Do you think the NBA is getting it right with the progressive nature of Adam Silver? Do you think the NFL is getting it right with not necessarily bear hugging and embracing the idea?
If I'm the commissioner, if I'm the commissioner, I take all the Whitlock upbringing out, and I just do
what's best for the league.
What's best for the league. I'm probably against it for the reason I'm talking about in terms of your hardcore fans already are skeptical of, is everything on the up and up? We've seen Tim Donaghy talk about it in the NBA. There's so many. What really concerns me about football is how many subjective calls we're now asking the referees to make constantly, and whether or not they're going to call illegal contact past 5 yards. Now we've just thrown in this helmet rule. And literally I've made the comments before. I was like, they need to start introducing the referees in pregame warmups because they're the stars of a lot of these games, and they're actually deciding a lot of these games. And so if I'm the NFL, things are rolling so good, I'm making so much money, I'm a little bit concerned about the pervasiveness of gambling. If I'm the NBA and I'm trying to play catch up, and Adam Silver's always got a finger in the air and just does whatever the wind's blowing and whatever sounds good on social media. So I'm not shocked that the NBA is embracing the gambling thing, but I would be a bit more skeptical.
I think there are a lot of sports out there that should go aggressively into gambling. I give you a couple of examples. I think NASCAR is desperate to find an audience. If I were heading up NASCAR right now, I would go as aggressively as I can after the gambler, right? Because I think that that's a way they could potentially recapture some of the young people who don't necessarily care about cars. Back in the day, I was having a conversation with somebody. They're like, my wife's family's from Michigan. Like, back in the day, my father-in-law said most blue-collar guys could fix their car. Right, it was a big deal to get in your garage, be able to get underneath the hood, figure out what's going wrong. The cars have got so complicated now with all the computers and everything else involved that they've lost that connection to you feeling like a part of your car in the same way. So if I'm NASCAR, I'm doing whatever I can. If I am out there and I'm in golf has got this bad idea that they should be competing with football. Golf is fun because a lot of you guys know this. You can bet on multiple golfers going into a tournament. You can constantly adjust. I would be involved in that. And then, frankly, I think the best selling point the WNBA could have, people are not going to watch women's basketball by and large, maybe college, UConn, Lady Vols, if you're connected to those programs. But by and large, the WNBA has not been able to, in any way, substantially influence the overall sports marketplace. If they really just said, screw it, and I know they're on a couple of casinos, they're on a couple, if they just said, screw it, we exist to try and have fun with gambling, I'd be more likely to watch the WNBA.
You've brought me to another great question. We're going to separate the men from the boys in this audience. Raise your hand if you've ever bet on a WNBA game.
Look at, and for people, again, who are not watching on video, almost every hand went up.
Look, and so I just want to be clear here. That's how I know I don't have a gambling problem. I've never bet on the. See, these guys, everybody that raised their hand, you got a gambling problem. You got a gambling problem. Me, I have mine under control.
It's a great test question out there, but I also think that is an incredible way to get people interested in the WNBA, right? I mean, that's a time of the year when there's not a lot of other sporting events going on, and if you just want some action, if you want to sit back, you're shaking your head, but I'm
afraid of these people. I mean, most of this audience is, wow. That really blew.
You're talking to the 20%. Degenerates of the degenerates.
Yeah, I really am. Whitlocks don't bet on the WNBA.
I'm Clay Travis, by the way. We're talking here. Sportsbook Review does an incredible job. You mentioned this off the break for people who may be tuning in now, watching us on YouTube and around the place. I love to go on Sportsbook Review because I like to be able to check out the lines everywhere. Right? If you consider yourself to be a sophisticated gambler, and I'm not, but I like to consider myself to be one, I think it's a big difference between, let's say I'm betting on the Colorado State and Hawaii game tonight, right? Hawaii's had to travel. The line's up to 17. I just checked it right before I came in. There's a big difference between getting 17, 16 and a half. And it was 14 before that. Big difference between getting 14, 13 and a half. Great place to go. You also said find out who you can trust. Because I feel like trust in the world of gambling, I think that's a big component in all these states becoming legalized, is do you feel like you can get your money back? Whether you're talking to your bookie down at the bar and you've had a good run, or whether you're talking about an offshore or even a casino in one of these states, being able to get your cash when you actually win is important.
It's the only reason to gamble.
Yeah.
I don't know another reason. And so, yeah, again, I said I discovered Sportsbook Review more than a decade and a half ago when I was in Kansas City. Now that I live in L.A., I've pretty much restricted myself to Vegas gambling because it's so close and easy. And so I've kind of lost touch with that world. But, yeah, knowing that your money's going to arrive is the number one thing, and that's the number one reason why I discovered Sportsbook Review.
I'm Clay Travis, at Clay Travis on Twitter. He's Jason Whitlock, at Whitlock Jason. I host the Fox Sports Radio National Morning Show. He is on Speak for Yourself, FS1 Afternoons Daily. Great show. How many times have you retired from gambling? Had a bad beat and been like, I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore.
Twice this year. And I'll go on droughts. Yeah. I took a 1-year hiatus from Vegas probably 3 or 4 years ago where I just like, man, I just can't do it. Because I love coming out here on NFL Sundays. I've been staying at the MGM since Mike Tyson got out of prison and started fighting at the MGM in the mid-'90s. And I love sitting upstairs in their sports book on an NFL Sunday. And again, you guys know how gambling can get. Sometimes, at some point, you go, hold on, this is stopping my enjoyment of NFL Sundays. I'm leaving here angry, and so I've taken a year off for reasons like that. But for the most part, because I've got to a point where I've finally got experience enough where I kind of manage my money instead of just being an idiot. And because my dad would be the type of guy. My parents got divorced. My dad, he was not afraid to lose his paycheck, but I haven't. I've never done that, and so I think I have things under control. But yes, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times in my life where it's like, okay, I'm gonna take a year off from ever going to Vegas and gambling.
Yeah, and I think how many of you have retired? Show of hands. How many of you have taken
no
some time
retirees
off?
out here?
That's amazing. So everybody's bet on the WNBA. Nobody has ever retired out here.
One guy is retired.
Here's a big question. Do you gamble to make money or to have fun? Ideally, it's both. But I think the way I approach it, and I have always approached it, is I think gambling on sports makes sports more fun. I already love the sports. I already love watching the games. I do it because it makes me enjoy the game more, and I can see a lot of you nodding out there. I think that's the healthy way to do it. Do you balance that in your mind sometimes? Do you think I'm going to make money gambling it, or are you thinking this is an expense, this is fun, I hope I can make some money doing it too?
This is a part of my upbringing, and clearly I'm not where I started out. But, I grew up poor. And so, gambling and, in Indianapolis where I grew up, we had these things called pea-shake houses, these little houses in the hood where they'd have a lottery in the house every 2 to 3 hours. And several of our Christmases were either won or lost or made from my mother winning money at a pea shake house. And so for me, gambling, the way I've experienced it growing up, gambling was always about making money and doing something with the money when you make it. This earring I have in right now is, I think, an $8,000 earring, and I won it at the craps table at the MGM. And so it's like if gambling's always about winning and doing something with the money, and that's been my approach since growing up. So I can't say it is fun and entertaining, but for me, just the way that I grew up and as poor as we were, and the highs and lows from when things were good, particularly at holiday season, if things went well and we won some money gambling, it was the greatest Christmas ever. If not, we got a couple of gifts, but nothing big. So gambling for me is about making money.
You said you've been staying at the MGM for a while, and you specifically mentioned boxing. How much fun have you had betting boxing?
Never done it.
Never done it.
I've never bet a boxing. I bet football and basketball. When Tyson would fight or anybody fight, I'd never do it. One, it's because I just think boxing's so corrupt. I don't trust it, so I just don't do it.
Especially when it comes down to the judgments and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Never. That's amazing. I've never bet a fight.
And you like boxing, obviously. Like you enjoy watching it.
Oh, I mean, look, there's some people out here as old as me. You guys know how great Vegas was when the heavyweight fights really meant something. This is one of the greatest events you could ever go to, but it wasn't a gambling event for me then. That was about me coming out here and getting liquored up and looking at all the sights.
All right, I think they wanted us to take some questions from you guys. So I think we have got a mic out there in the crowd. If you want to ask a question of either me or Jason Whitlock, you can raise your hand, and we'll do our best to respond to you. So just raise your hand. I see that they've got the mics out on the side, and we'll take some of your questions now here. Appreciate all you coming out here again. Sportsbook Review for putting on such an incredible event. It is really great. It's interesting to see how much this continues to grow.
And the question doesn't have to have anything to do with gambling. It can be about anything.
We'll answer anything. But by the way, last year I went down to Costa Rica at this first event, and I told my wife, this thing is going to be huge. And so I think it's just continuing to grow. I think 10 years from now, people will say, hey, I remember when I used to go, and they'd have it in one room. I think this is the kind of thing that's going to be massive in the years ahead. So consider yourself early adopters here.
Hey guys, good stuff so far, and I've listened to your show, Clay, and your guys' segment is great stuff, great content.
Appreciate that.
No problem. Jason, a question for you. One, an actual betting item. You're a Division I football player in the MAC. Is there like a travel situation that you would look to kind of bet on or fade a team in the MAC? And also want to ask you about your road to what college football and football in general has done for you, because I've heard you talk with Clay on his show about, I guess, kind of the war on football. So if you could touch on that and how good it's been to you.
And again, just remember, just because I'm an experienced gambler doesn't mean I'm a good gambler. I'm a bad gambler. And so I would say the advantage that I see in the MAC is if you can figure out who the great team is in the MAC, and 2008 Ball State team, I knew going in like, well, holy cow, they're going to be great. And I think, we probably covered 10 of 12 games. If there's a dominant team in the MAC, they can roll and cover over that's the advantage I look for. PJ Fleck had it going at Western Michigan and was recruiting all the 3-star kids and got a couple 4-star kids to come into that conference. And when PJ was there at Western Michigan that last year, they were pretty dominant, and I remember riding them. That's the advantage. I can't give you any insight because, again, I'm a bad gambler. Again, I like to do it, but I'm a bad gambler. I don't look that deep. As it relates to your question about me and football, I tell the story all the time because I see an attack on football. And it bothers me because I don't think we have a true understanding of football and the role that it plays in young black men's lives. And so, I tell people all the time that me and my dad, my senior year of high school, lived in a one-bedroom, 400-square-foot apartment in the hood. And I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't a great student. No one other than football was looking for me in that one-bedroom apartment in the hood to say, hey, I'm going to pick you up and put you on a college campus and completely change your worldview in life. Football does that all the time. I never got a whiff of an NFL tryout or was that never a NFL prospect once I got to Ball State University, but my life was transformed. I went from the hood to a college campus, had my worldview opened up to all kinds of possibilities, started a career in the media that allows me to live a very great life. And so I go from the ghetto to now living in Westwood in a zip code 924 that's one of the wealthiest in America, and that's because of football. And there's all kinds of black kids like me and white kids that come from economic disadvantage whose lives are transformed because of football. I would have never probably stepped foot on a college campus if not for football. And so even if you don't make it to the NFL, football can have an enormous impact on your life. And so that's why I'm a defensive of football. I don't think that I look at Colin Kaepernick and a lot of these guys that are trying to change the environment around football, and I just question if they really understand, like, football in the NFL, 70% African-American players, everybody making really good money. There's no other industry in American history that has created more black millionaires than the NFL. It's rap music, and we think that's our culture, and we think it's great for us. It's not even close to the transference of wealth from poor kid to NFL player, black kid. Rap music can't even come close. It's a different universe in terms of the number of people being touched by the NFL, black men touched by the NFL and having their whole lives transformed. And so that's why I'm very defensive about football, and I'm telling these guys, man, you got to be careful about unwittingly participating in something that's going to hurt an industry that has been very good to us just because people have you whipped up into an emotional frenzy about, well, you got to do a gesture during an NFL game to raise awareness. And this gesture, what real impact has it had? It makes everybody feel good over Twitter, but it hasn't stopped anything. It hasn't prevented anything. Oh, it started a conversation. Man, we've been talking about these issues ad nauseum. We act like race never gets discussed in America. It gets discussed all the time. And so I've said a mouthful here, but I'm very defensive about football. The place to protest, in my opinion, if the police have done something wrong, take it to their business. Disrupt their business, not your own.
Well said on a lot of stuff there. Questions, you got your hands up, you want to ask us anything, they're walking around with mics. Just let me know where the next question is coming from. Back in the corner I see there, fire away.
Yeah, I was wondering, with the legalization being broadened and more states getting it, we're seeing a lot of opinions on sports betting. Some are really good, some aren't particularly good. Where do you see sports betting media going?
It's a really smart question. I'll answer, and I'll let Jason hop in too. I think where it's going is to, one, just being a lot more of it. And I think it's an intriguing question what it will look and sound like. I love to talk about sports gambling. I am not pretending to be an expert. I think Jason would probably say the same thing about himself. I look at it as fun, right? I give you my picks. They may or may not win. There are also going to be the hardcore quant guys, right? The guys who are deep into the data and the analytics. I think that those guys are going to have a huge market and it's going to be very lucrative, but I don't think it's going to be the masses. I think the 90% of people out there who like sports gambling want stories. They want good beats. They want bad beats. They want to know that, for instance, I bet Colorado State because I think that the hurricane in Hawaii and the way the Hawaiian team had to travel and everything else surrounding that, psychologically, I think is going to have an impact on the way they play. The quant guys would say, you're an idiot. All I care about is the X's and O's on the field, right? They don't really get into the mind as much. So I think there's going to be a wide and a varied number of guys, mostly guys, girls too, who will make a living in sports gambling. But I think the ones who make the best living are not going to be necessarily the best gamblers. They're going to be the most entertaining gamblers. They're going to be the guys that you would want to hang out and be watching a game with, because all of you know how hard it is to consistently pick winners in this business. Even if you're good one year, the next year you may be bad, and you might not have done anything at all different. It's just hard, right? The market, I think, is going to get tighter and tighter as more people get involved. So I tend to focus on, let's have fun with this. Let's make it more entertaining than sports already is by embracing gambling. My neck of the woods is not to be an expert. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a market being created now that it's coming out of the closet and being more pervasive. And so I think, like Clay's website, Outkick the Coverage, Clay writes a weekly gambling picks column, which is more for entertainment. It's certainly his picks. But I think at some point Clay's going to hire someone who is a gambling expert who's going to give you expert advice. And so you're going to eventually get a mix of the expert advice with some opinion mixed in there. And I think the first guy that can identify himself first on the internet, in the media, that guy's going to then elevate to a television broadcaster. The guy who can give you expert advice and be entertaining and tell you the stories or whatever, eventually there's going to be a large television and or radio role for that person. And look, the people probably already exist. You guys probably already know them. It's just now the television networks and stuff, they're going to actually be on the lookout for those guys.
I mean, there's going to be a Matthew Berry of sports gambling, right? Matthew Berry has turned himself into a multimillionaire by being an expert in fantasy football. And a decade ago, or 12 or 13 years ago, if Matthew Berry had been sitting up here, you'd have been like, really? You're going to go professionally into talking about fantasy football? I think there's going to be a lot of people who are professionally going in to talk about sports gambling.
Clay, it's no different than how I was the first media person to be a sex symbol and a top sports writer at the same time. Someone's going to be first in on the gambling thing.
Well said. I remember one of my buddies always said, you want to make sure that you're not the ugliest guy in the press box. Because if you've ever been in a press box, there are a lot of ugly dudes in that press box. You ever become the ugliest dude in the press box, you're one of the ugliest dudes in the world. What do we got back there in the center, I believe?
Is that my brother?
Yeah.
With the new rules in the NFL, with the helmet and all those new rules they implementing, what's going to be the total outcome
chaos
when it comes down to sports betting? Like
chaos.
It kind of seems like it's going to be an automatic over because there's going to be like continuous chances. Like how in the long term, how is it going to affect betting?
Several of us in this room will probably die this season of a heart attack from some bullshit call that cost us money. So if there are any doctors in here, you'll probably make some more money this year.
I think you're right. Over is the play, right? If they call the same way in the preseason that they do in the regular season, there's going to be a lot of drives extended. There's going to be a lot more field goal opportunities, touchdown opportunities for the offense.
Did y'all miss the 5-0?
I watched the 5-0 game. I watched it because I had the who they were playing.
You had
against.
the over?
No, I didn't have
blood
the over.
bank pick.
The blood bank guarantee was not the over, but I had the other side there. I thought the Eagles were going to cover. Questions? We got somebody here. Is anybody else in the back? By the way, we appreciate you guys again. Sportsbook Review putting this on. I'm Clay Travis. He's Jason Whitlock. You can follow him on Twitter at Whitlock Jason. I'm at Clay Travis on Twitter. Up front, what you got for us?
Yeah, just touching on how you were just mentioning about how the new helmet rule could affect like totals, like over-unders in the NFL this season. Kind of similar to a couple years ago in college basketball when the shot clock was reduced from 35 to 30. And how it took a couple weeks, not long, because the odds makers they're
sharp. They're going to adjust it.
Everything, but they did have to make an adjustment on adjusted tempo offensively and defensively for each team. Is that kind of similar to how you were explaining about the helmet rule? Just how each sport, even if it's a small rule change, can drastically have an impact on the point spread or the total.
Yeah, I think a great example of that we just saw was the review in the World Cup that led to a lot more penalty kicks, which also led to a lot more goals being scored, right? Yeah, and so I don't think that your average gambler, the overs hit at an inordinate rate, if you had been skilled enough to project that, even without breaking down the individual teams, you could have just played overs and made a lot of money. Now, as it moved on, it seemed as if that kind of got reconfigured, but those first couple of rounds, there are a lot more goals. So I think that's a good precedent for what could happen.
You know, one of the rules that I'm really looking forward to, and I wasn't following your question at the beginning, so maybe this is what you're talking about, but the NBA's new rule about going to 14 seconds on the shot clock after an offensive rebound, I can't wait to see what that does to the NBA, and particularly end-of-game situations and how it affects the tempo and pace of play. But, yeah, I think any new rule, obviously there's going to be an adjustment period, and gamblers are going to have to figure that out. Again, you're talking to one of the worst gamblers on the planet here, so don't look for me for the insight.
We've got a red light blinking here on us. We've gone over, but we're happy to shake hands, pose for pictures if you guys want to come up and say hi. Again, appreciate everybody here who put on this incredible event, year 2. It's going to start tomorrow morning. For those of you who want to get your gamble on or want to start getting your drink on, 11 a.m. Pacific, so you don't have to be up bright and early. But credit to Sportsbook Review, IFBC. This has been phenomenal, fantastic year 2, off and on a roll. I appreciate y'all having us. Clay Travis, Jason Whitlock, thanks.
I'm high on the Jets this year.
High on the Jets.
I'm high on the Jets. But I'm a bad gambler.